Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and it's been an exciting week. I just finished playing a board game with my daughter, and she busted out some amazing strategies to prolong the game and force me to bring my A game. So that's always lovely. I wanted to do the 10 on a theme book video. I saw this originally, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, Brian at Bookish did one on revenge, and I guess Mel at Mel's Bookland Adventures did the first one where it was like hashtag 10 on a theme, books about revenge, and it was a lot of like great mystery books, or Brian brought in some great books where characters were just so focused on revenge. And then Mark Nash did one, I think last week, where he identified like 10 cities and then books that he felt really exemplified those cities. So I wanted to go in a different direction. And one of the things I love is I love listening to music. I've got my Miles Davis t-shirt on right now. And if you think the bookshelves look cluttered, my wife is even more furious about what's on this other wall with my CD collection from high school and college. So what I wanted to do is identify 10 books that have music as an important part of the book, whether it's to set this like sense of time and place, or whether it's because there are characters who are involved in music, or for various reasons. So I'm figuring out the title, but like 10 notes maybe is what I'll call it. So the first few are examples where there's characters who are either musicians or they're very focused on musicians. And one of the first ones that I just love, and I think is a really fun book, is City of Dark Magic by Magnus Flyte, which is a pseudonym. And it's just such an exciting book. It's set in Prague, and you get such a sense of like that Central European culture of the past and the history that's there. But of course, the most exciting part is you've got this character who can travel through time and experience Beethoven, and is just very focused on Beethoven. And so I was thinking of Beethoven. I don't actually have a Beethoven like CD example, but I grabbed Gustav Mahler, who's one of my favorite classical composers. Book 2 is London Blues by Anthony Frewin, and it's blues as in blue film. So it's a mystery novel set in the 60s. Yeah, late 50s, early 1960s, that deals with like black and white blue films or adult films being filmed in and around London. It's a fantastic, bizarre, really bizarre thriller. Like they think a character is killed on like the very first chapter, and then it's unraveling, and it deals with, I believe it's the Profumo scandal from the 60s that sort of helped bring down a government at the time. But one of the things that's great, and this is an example of like a book that I feel uses music really well, is this character is just a bizarre jazz aficionado. So he wants to go find all of these jazz records, that some of which you can find either in record form or in CD form, or obviously online through YouTube or something. But he goes and he finds all of these. He just is constantly like trying to hunt for great jazz records. And so one of the ones he really focuses on is Thelonious Monk and Brilliant Corners, which is quite a good jazz album. So London Blues by Anthony Frewin. One that immediately jumped to mind of characters that have a band, Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon, where we have a real send-up of none other than the Beatles. I grabbed Beatles for Sale because I think that consumerism is part of what Pynchon is trying to send up. He even has these bizarre and ludicrous songs that the characters sing. David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas is an exciting one where we have a character who's actually a composer. We have a character who is trying to compose. He's trying to like create his great work that will make him valuable and important. He's working with it sort of as an amanuensis for a older musician composer, and all sorts of nonsense. You get that sense of like fin de say decadence and stuff going on. And as a composer I thought of that fit with that was Alkan, who is mid 1800s, and he feels like a decadent composer. Like it's what happened if Mozart lived to be 50 and got divorced and just became very jaded. That's almost the type of music Alkan composes, in my opinion. And I was actually turned on to Alkan by a Douglas Preston, the Preston and Child books, Dance of Death or Book of the Dead, where Diogenes Pendergast lists his favorite composer, and it was Alkan, and that's when I, looked up Alkan. And outside the box choice, George R. R. Martin of Game of Thrones fame once wrote a horror novel about a band called the Nazgul, Lord of the Rings, who may or may not be able to like summon the dead, or like, open a gate to hell or something, lead to Armageddon, hence the Armageddon rag. And it starts out with the Nazgul lead singer it sort of is a follow-up to the famous Monterey Pop Woodstock Altamont, and Altamont, of course, it was horrifying, and there was a concert goer who was like murdered there in the crowd at the concert, caught on film. Martin puts another concert after that called West Mesa that takes place in Albuquerque, and then like Kennedy assassination style, the lead singer is killed during the concert by a sniper. And so there's this whole thing around getting the band back together and all sorts of weird stuff. But it's filled with Martin's love for that 60s music. And at the beginning he lists this whole group of bands that he thinks are important. And you'll notice that the third one is to the Beatles, to the Airplane, and the Spoonful, and the Dead. And he goes on and on and on. The Lovin' Spoonful? Well, a delight. I don't know if they belong in that conversation. I've mentioned this series before, but the Nick Travers Mysteries by Ace Atkins are just fantastic. Musicologist / private investigator, not really collecting money for it, just doing it as favors. And the first one, Crossroad Blues, of course, is emphasizing the famous Robert Johnson. Following that group, much more recent series, Ghost Road Blues by Jonathan Maberry, and really it's set in like rural Pennsylvania, and there are there's a deep sense of like the history of like racism and lynching in the U.S. There's a sense of just real terror and horror. The second book is called Bad Moon Rising, which kind of gives you a sense of like the idea of music. But one of the characters is like this, maybe a ghost, maybe an angel, it's unclear, maybe a demon, guitarist. And as you read it, one of the like blues guitarists who came to mind was Blind Willie Johnson, who famously did Dark Was the Night. I don't want to talk too much about this one, but if you've read the Joe Nesbo Harry Hole series, you'll know that Harry Hole's a big fan of the Rolling Stones and likes to talk trash about Graham Parsons of Graham Parsons, but he helped do Sweetheart of the Rodeo by the Byrds, and then the Flying Burrito Brothers, one of my favorite country rock bands. But within Nemesis, there's one character who's always listening to Prince on the radio, and it becomes kind of like an in-joke and actually a valuable point that you have this character who's like, he's an alcoholic and he's grungy and he doesn't take care of himself very well, and he of course is a Stones fan. And then you've got this detective who's put together and he's successful and he's like very sleek and 80s, and he listens to Prince. I love Prince. Another one that just a great book, but truly a sense of using music to build time and setting. London Blues does this really well, but George Pelecanos in The Sweet Forever. So it's set in 1980s Washington, D.C. Yeah, in D.C., not Baltimore. In Washington, D.C., and it's in the early 80s, or mid-80s. No, it's the late 80s, because it's Len Bias. And there's, like, drug use is going on. Characters have seen the neighborhood change, and Pelecanos is very much trying to create this sense of time and place, and so he constantly is referencing 80s bands the entire book. But the most 80s band that he's mentioning that fits in with The Sweet Forever is Echo and the Bunnymen. So I brought out Ocean Rain, which famously has Killing Moon, by far Echo and the Bunnymen's best song, Don't At Me, and a song that's referenced in The Sweet Forever. The 10th book I want to grab is actually a nonfiction book. It's a collection of prog rock articles called Yes Is the Answer and Other Prog Rock Tales. So I grabbed Close to the Edge, my favorite Yes album. Just a masterpiece. Preacher, and You and I / part 3, The Preacher and the Teacher, my favorite Yes song. But this is a really interesting book. It is a series of essays and articles by people about how meaningful different prog rock bands, like each article or essay is about a different band and it's from a different person, about how meaningful listening to that band was, or going and seeing it them in concert, or trying to find like a weird bootleg live album or some outtakes or something, and just that sense of community that can exist through music, and the community that can exist through books. And I think right now, I think of people who don't feel like we have the traditional communities we're so used to, and some of these digital communities, or the communities we share of people we grew up with and listened to music with, and had special moments in our lives where music was part of that. This book is filled with that. Some of the stories are sad, some of them are very happy, but it's really filled with the idea that music can be a shared experience, especially when you're listening to maybe some niche music like prog rock. So that was 10 notes on music and books. See you later.